Hi there, and welcome to the Analytics Excellence Certification Series. This is the next installation. My name is Thomas Marlowe. If you've been at the earlier ones, you've heard my voice before. Currently President of Black Hills IP Renewals, run operations and technology for Black Hills IP, previously of the Schweigman Lundberg firm, and previously running the IP department at Fairchild Semiconductor. As always, I've got with me today Mark Stignani. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. I am also with Schweigman Lundberg and Wozer. I'm running their analytics department. Previously working with an IP at Thomson Reuters, where I was able to, expansively work in analytics, especially with some of the more higher-end tools that Thomson Reuters had at the time there, and now I get to use all the tools that everybody has. So thank you again for attending, and hopefully we'll talk about interesting stuff here.
Sure. So let's take a look at today's webinar. In the series, we're going to be talking about how to perform patent count analytics. If you missed last week, it was on patent watching and monitoring, and so those previous sessions will be available on demand if you want to go catch those and get caught up. But today we're going to dive into patent count analytics. So, Mark, do you want to give us a little background on this?
Sure, absolutely. And for those who saw the first section, you probably saw this slide as well. This is just kind of an introduction. Patent counting is, by anybody's measure in patent analytics, probably the most basic and simple thing that everyone does in the patent analytics world. It runs two general gamuts: by owner of the patents and by classification of the patents, whether you use a formalized patent classification system or you use your own or some proprietary one. Again, why do we keep count? I mean, I covered this before. There's lots and lots of this. These two items here are really, just scratching the tip of the iceberg. Sometimes we use it to estimate budgetary or innovation factors of a particular patent owner. We also use it, really thoroughly and more simply as a metric for competitors. So we look at a ton of different things. We cluster things using, a lot of machine techniques. And when do we do it? Literally all the time. But the one thing that I didn't present before is that the art form of patent count analytics is really choosing what to count, because this is the who, what, when, why, and how million-dollar question here, because at some point your clientele generally isn't going to ask you to, just give me company X's patent portfolio and compare it against mine. That's almost a no-brainer to do. But the next question is that tell me how many patents in those counts that I care about. And that becomes the art form. So what you use to exclude the matters from being counted is very, very important for you to consider before engaging in a patent count, because like I said, anybody can give you a full company or a full classification count because it's basically an easy thing to do. But once you get into the level of sophistication about what do I care about, or what does my client care about, or what does my business executive care about, that's when patent counts really start to become monumentally complex and difficult to do.
So, Mark, basically what you're saying is it's not so much about the counts themselves, but where most of the time is spent, I guess, to be valuable, is in putting together the data sets that you'll be counting out of.
Absolutely. I mean, half of the cleverness that patent analytics requires is understanding what a data set is that's meaningful to your clientele or or the questions you're looking to pull out. So, once you have that hard question answered, then the counting is relatively straightforward, because you're really just extracting things from different bibliofields or other, hard fielded evidence in the patent itself.
Sure.
So moving on here, I like to divide patent counting into two different things: direct pivots and indirect pivots. So what the heck's a pivot? A pivot to me is a data point that you want to rotate around to extract various inferences. So a direct pivot would be, start with the most basic: who owns this, and why do we, who owns this, and how many have they done? But it gets probably much more interesting if we start adding a couple of the direct pivots. So how many in this class by this owner? You can stack these things up, level after level after level. In general, I think a direct pivot is extractable data from bibliographic data. There's dates, who, where has it been classified, so forth and so on. Who's representing it, the prosecution. Indirect pivots, to me, are things that you have to extract data from at least one or more sources that is not straight from the patent bibliofields. And it may require some free text analysis. It may require extraction from non-standard data systems, like from a social network or marketing brochures or things like that. So I like to try to think about things that are, direct pivots are almost always straightforward and easy to do. A lot of everybody does it, and they're pretty much straightforward in what you can do with them. A lot of people don't stack them as much as they can. So, for instance, if we're stacking, a direct pivot of which law firms are being used by a company to prosecute their patents, that's not something that I see a lot of people doing. But it's very, very helpful, especially if you're a law firm looking to see who you're going to go up against, who do you have to be better than, or who's the relationship most likely to be with in that firm. So a lot of great
Mark,
things there. Yeah.
In that example, you might be searching in a particular technology space. So you might say, I'm interested in widgets, and I've got a group of patents in there. So then I could, for your example, I could then pivot by company. Here's the companies that operate within that search set that I've done, and then add to that pivot, or stack, as you put it, the law firm, so I can see here's the different companies active in this field, and here's the law firms that are used by those different companies. Maybe I can see which ones are used by the biggest players in that field, for example. Exactly,
and especially in the days where you've got law firms are supposed to really perform really good conflict checks, but in so many ways you can look and see who your competitors are using first, so that you don't even start with them if you're choosing a law firm to handle a particular area of technology. At least you can see if they're currently representing them or not. Also very useful. And then when I talk about the indirect pivots, I'm going to talk about stacking patents or IP around products, various statistical or semantic extracts of concepts either in the patent body itself, free text, or harvesting things glossary-wise and trying to find things that have a high degree of similarity in that thing. Looking at citation generally, one may think it's a direct pivot, but it's actually there's enough nuance to it to make you have to sort whether a citation came out of an IDS or it came out of an examiner, and did it have any effect on the patent prosecution itself? Was there a 101, 102, 103 as a result of that citation? Budget is an indirect thing because you have to have an estimate of what a law firm may charge for a patent, that you can then go back to the counts of the patents and make some budget estimations. Renewals, I let Tom talk more about that, but we can hybridize anything under the sun in using an indirect pivot that might be useful to your business person or any other clientele you may be working for. Tom, you want to touch on renewals?
Well, actually, if you don't mind, when you say hybridize, what would be an example of something of that particular topic?
Okay, well, what we could do is say I'm taking a statistical extract of I want any claim on a neuromodulator that has a 40% threshold similarity using latent semantic indexing thing, and also has a citation or a pair notation that caused a 102 on the competitor.
Got it.
So you could take little bits and drabs, and you can get the sophistication is endless in how complex you can get. I mean, a lot of times you end up zeroing yourself out if you get too crazy, too complex, too fast. But it's a great way of a cascading filter that allows you to bit by bit whack down the full number of patents you have to look at and get it into a useful set of something for further analysis. It's a great way to get down to what really matters.
Yeah, that does sound pretty interesting. You were asking me quickly about renewals, and that area is interesting because essentially when we're talking about renewals, we're talking about abandonments or lack of abandonments in a particular set of patents, whether we're looking at a company or a landscape. And if we see patents continuing to be maintained and kept in force, that that indicates money being spent. And if we see patents being abandoned, that indicates money being saved. And those economic drivers can give us some potentially interesting business information.
Absolutely right. I think that the renewals by themselves are a key element in some of the hybridized things, especially if you're doing product analysis too. So you start seeing them dropping patents that you have mapped to a certain line of products. Two things could happen. Your patent, you may have mapped it incorrectly, of course, but it also may be that they are preparing to sunset that set of products. So let's move on and talk about pros and cons here. Direct counts are, again, I said, there's direct evidence. It's the easiest thing to do, most commonly done. I tend to use it as a starting point. I use it as a first basis to look at what are competitors doing. Looking at ideation, if somebody is suddenly diverging from their standard classes of portfolios that are doing. I use it as an indicator of are they changing how they're budgeting. I also use it as a stress because one of the things I start to see, especially in companies that have run into the proverbial financing wall, is that their patents tend to get abandoned fairly quickly at an office action, generally first office action, or there's not a really good reason sometimes why they abandon things. If you look at it, and they may have only gotten a 103 rejection in their first office action, so there's another reason why they're letting things go abandoned. So it is a good first indicator of distress if you see a sudden drop-off of filings or an increased number of abandons. I think direct counts can be unreliable because they don't talk really about legal coverage. So if I'm given a set of patents and want to have someone get a sense for what they cover legally, a count doesn't give you anything. It just gives you quantity. It doesn't talk about quality. Assignee creep and orphan patents. A lot of companies who are big buyers and sellers of companies have a tendency to sometimes lose their applications if they're not really focused on their patent portfolio. Most of the commercial systems out there do a terrible job, 60% accuracy or less, of finding which assignee belongs to which patent, especially when you have large merger and acquisition work. I just don't think they do it well. So you have to go out and do a crawl with a human through all the various assignees and all the various company names that have gone through, especially in the last year, because most of these ontologies don't update more than once a year on big companies even, and go find them. You also can't see things, and especially things that are unique to the U.S., is there's a no publish clause in our patenting, so they can keep things essentially submarine for years, and you'll never see them as long as they're kind of filed only in the U.S. There's also the 18-month window, which applications are unpublished for secrecy reasons that you can't really see. So your count may be plus or minus a lot in the case of a heavily patented zone because of these two factors. Now you can do some indirect work here because I'll talk about this more on the indirect pivot side, but you can go out and mine out through social networks, because a lot of people brag about their patent filing, and you may get advanced release of a patent, at least advanced notification of a patent or more, or several patents filed in an area just because someone posted it on Facebook or LinkedIn or one of the other areas which you were able to kind of identify by primary contributor. So let's take some examples and talk about direct pivots. So I'm just going to use Medtronic as an example. I'm going to show some examples of how we can do direct pivots and make some judgments about law firms and countries and marketplace and inventors and abandons just using Medtronic as an example. Using Medtronic because they got a great portfolio and they're not a client. So I don't really want to talk about them, any of my clients in that respect. So without a further hitch, we'll just kind of step into some examples and talk about how we might think about looking at this. So this is worldwide Medtronic portfolio, and using the tool that I use is the dashboard here. So we have a total count of matters up at the top here. We have kind of a general count of the applications. All just counts. We have a count of abandonments. We have a count of expireds. We have a global distribution of the portfolio. We can see that they're a big PCT filer with WO applications. So we can kind of make some very, very quick decisions about a company and their posturing, both globally and as well as their level of budgetary importance as to what they file in. So going a little deeper into this here, this count by itself is informative as to potentially the level of budget. If we think we know what an application costs, we can look at the year-on-year filing rate and figure out some spend from there. We'll do some of that more further. Tom, I think I heard you.
Yeah, so you could take any of the numbers that show up on this page, or frankly this whole view at once, and compare two or more companies next to each other with some of this basic count data, right?
Absolutely.
And so you could use that to compare a portfolio strategy of company A with company B. But I guess, let's say it's your company and you're comparing to a competitor, right? How do they look? How are they filing in this region of the world? How many do they have issued? How many do they have pending? But you could also use this data to take a look at two or more, say, third-party companies. Maybe there are two potential M&A targets, right?
Yeah, and you can see the overlap, and I'm going to slide a little further along that I can will draw attention to that. Yeah, the power here is that especially if you are in business executive mode and you're presenting to a business executive, simple charts like this are very, very easy to put in context the effort, the gross effort that's out there within an IP portfolio, and by order by order of budget, if you will, which countries are most important to them. So in many, as you can see, by the global map here, Medtronic doesn't really look to its patent portfolio to help it to a great degree in the Southeastern Asia region, the Middle East, and all but for a few countries in Africa. And so it just comes out as a glance. You also see that the West Coast to South America is virtually left to itself. So some of this is going to be because if you understand the English property laws of those countries, it may be continuously difficult to get good registrations in a marketplace. But if it's essentially devoid at all, it's a pretty good chance it's not a great marketplace for them. So again, just some of the basic count analysis right up front. You get some useful things about it. You don't know how good their portfolio is. You don't know how expensive it is, and you don't know if you've figured out where all the applicants, whether you've got all their named patents in it. But again, if you've done that work ahead of time, you've got a good comparison place at this point. So as we're talking about comparisons here, I'm just pivoting around the A61 class right now, A61N class. Hit the button too far. So this is by far Medtronic's top area of patenting by International Patent Classification Code. There's U.S. Classification Code, which is on its way into retirement. Everybody's moving to the Common Patent Classification System, the CPC, which is essentially a more granular version of the IPC. But for those who care. But this way you can pretty much see who the patent filers are of any note, and who's essentially the second tier or the next tier down of people who are filing in this. Again, this graphic does not actually take into effect the taxonomy and ontology issue that I spoke of earlier of who owns what. This is just simply the names that are registered at the various patent offices and accounts for that level. One of the things that, so you can quickly suss out who's in the playground, who are probably the primary competitors, and if you continue this membership on down lower and lower and lower, you will start to see the people who are either up and coming, or the people who it is more of a sideline business than it is a frontline business. Another direct pivot, top inventors. So here's a set of Medtronic inventors. You can see that they're quite prolific in their invention counts and numbers. You can see that because of the headquarters in Minnesota and then also in California, where the Neurostim group is, you've got a high concentration of inventors. Now, inventor pivots are also very, very interesting because you can also see company movement. So, for instance, Martin T. Gerber has moved on to a different company since being the top inventor for Medtronic, and we know this because we can see when we look at his data specifically that his most recent patent filings are with a different company. Now, one of the things that's also very useful, more for the legal side, is that if you have an inventor who did lots of work for your company, and this inventor moves to another company and starts patenting their area of expertise again in that marketplace, there is a very strong trade secret thought process going on here that you maybe, if you're the company who lost the inventor, could look at, whether or not that inventor took trade secret data with them to the next job and starting to patent it. In the court cases that I've seen on this, it is a very difficult discussion to argue that, the patents you have at the new company were not trade secrets that you had carried with you from your previous employer. It's a very, very big hammer. I think I've seen it used a couple times. So something worth noting if you're representing companies that are losing inventors to another company.
Another, Mark, that's a really good point. And another, I guess another way to look at top inventors within a portfolio, especially when you're comparing two companies, would be what percentage of the portfolio do those top inventors make up? So you get an idea whether or not most of the R&D and technology development is focused on a few key individuals, or if it's more spread across, an entire technology department.
That's a really great point, because especially in the world of M&A, because you're, many times when you're the acquiring company, you're looking at you're looking for some judgment of who to keep and who not to keep, and whether or not the brain trust that theoretically you're buying is still with the company. So that's a really great point. Thanks for bringing that up, Tom. So another pivot, this kind of goes to the line of where Tom was speaking about earlier about comparing one to the other. So I've shown St. Jude and Abbott, which I think acquired St. Jude, and Convidia and Medtronic, which Medtronic acquired here. So we can kind of throw them together. We can kind of make some judgments about year-on-year activities, and we can chart those out pretty quickly here. So you can kind of and you can take this further. When I talk about stacking pivots, we could stack this by classification as well, and you would certainly see that the Medtronic acquisition of Covidien was essentially a stacking of IP rather than complementary IP. There weren't a lot of classes that were big in one and small in the other, but where Covidien was relatively big, Medtronic was also relatively big. Same likelihood for St. Jude and Abbott were a little more complementary, I think, in that acquisition. Well, but you can see the relative efforts year on year of various organizations doing their filings. So you can see the Medtronic really started early and stayed high, starting in the early 90s and keeping on going up here. You can discount the drop off in the last few years simply because of the secrecy issues. So I wouldn't pay attention to anything prior to say 2013 in some of this analysis, because I don't think I've updated the slide for a while. So this is an old slide. But you can really start to see the year-on-year by comparison. And if you set a number for patent filing, you can make a comparison that the Covidien matters, they were filing 300 a year, where at the same time that Medtronic was filing 600-700 a year. You can start to see relative budgets for PrEP and PROS pretty much fall right out there if you think that they're paying about the same price for a patent application, which isn't the best assumption, but sometimes it's good for windage and elevation.
And Mark, I think it's worth stressing here one of the points that you made earlier is depending on what you're looking for in the data, the entire company's portfolio might not serve that purpose, right? Exactly. So a partial portfolio, or saying, show me everything, related to technology A and B for Medtronic with respect to similar for another company, or say the company that you're representing and doing a comparison against. Because a lot of times, especially when, as when we're dealing with big companies, there's multiple product lines, and a lot of technology investment in one area might skew the numbers across the company to make it look like there's growth, where the product line that you're actually interested in might actually be decelerating.
Absolutely, and if I took this class by itself and then I looked at this same presentation with just that class, you may find that the level of interest level investment is entirely different by that classification subset as well. So sure. It's a really good idea to make sure what questions you're trying to answer, because you can look at this and make some assumptions, but if you really don't care about neurostem, then you look at the next aspects of it as well. So law firm evolution, I think, is a really interesting thought process, because one of the things that you can kind of do is see kind of who's doing level of effort for the various company. This suffers from a little imprecise aspect because not all applications seem to have law firm data on them, or they may be obscured by having the company itself be listed as the law firm or the agent on there. So this is analysis with some grain of salt, but we can do see kind of a year-on-year level of effort by the ebb and flow of various firms and the work that they're doing. So this is a very interesting thing. There are a couple tools out there do this, but I think it's a really interesting way of looking at the if you're a law firm and looking at the competition, if you will, or if you are a company looking to reevaluate your law firm presence, you may want to see why I've got my work spread across six attorneys here, 6 different firms, and I'm getting a price point of X, Y, and Z on each of those different firms. And gosh, if I'm getting better work out of one firm or the other, that might be a better way to approach this. Just moving on here to abandons. Abandons and expires. This is Medtronic's abandons over the years. So I think looking at abandons is a relatively new way of direct pivots. Previously, about 4 or 5 years ago, this data wasn't easily available, and you had to do a lot of extraction from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's publications to do this. But you can start to see when the notion of patent abandons and managing your portfolio based on what you think you can get and what you don't think you can get kind of hit in the Medtronic space. I mean, they went from almost no abandonments whatsoever to 2001 to really getting into the height of the fiscal depression. And they were starting to scrub real hard there, and then abandoning upwards of 300 matters. And when you make an abandonment, of a patent matter, there's a significant cost lost because you've undertaken the cost of writing, you've undertaken the cost, the human cost of having the inventors work through all those disclosures. So there's a great deal of this represents a painful decision by the patent owner, and a decision not to throw good money after bad, in essence. So you can see basically this sort of stuff happens with vigor over the last decade, and I think the portfolio gets a higher and higher yield. There's a yield question as well here. Is that if you don't put chase money after chasing something that should have been abandoned, you can move that money forward in the budget to something that you think has a better chance. So I'm a fan of making your portfolio worth more. So I think a good abandoned process and showing your clientele where your abandons are going is a really great way of helping them get a better patent portfolio.
Yeah, and it's not always such a painful process. Sometimes it's nice to let a few things go so that you got money in the budget going forward. Sometimes the spending is almost as painful as the abandonments themselves.
Yeah, and there's also an aspect of vanity to it as well. So
that's true. Yeah. On this slide, one of the things that's important as you're pulling data together to do this kind of analytic is to make sure that expirations aren't included in the abandonment data, so that we're not just talking about all patents that say fall out of force, because your expiration data is going to would skew the pure abandonment decision data by some sort of a variable each year.
Absolutely. And it's also curious to go back and look at the abandons in light of pivoting around inventors as well, because I find that companies have a much harder time abandoning matters that are associated with more prolific inventors, as this is both for the academic and the corporate operational groups, because I've done a couple studies that if you have a high prolific inventor, unnamed on the patent itself, they don't get abandoned as quickly or as often as you do when you don't have a high prolific inventor on there. So there's that's what I meant to say when there's a vanity aspect to this as well. So because I think that a prolific inventor has a lot more sway in the company to keep something from going abandoned.
Yeah, I can definitely vouch for having seen that one in the past too.
All right. So let's move to indirect. Now, indirect, as I said, is squishy, and so what we have here, I'm just going to talk about the various items and how we may think about going around them and accomplishing them, and where we might find the resources here. So, and we'll cover a few examples to close up here. But the indirect counting or indirect pivoting is really where you're trying to draw some sort of relationship between a patent portfolio and a product, or a patent portfolio related to something that is, unless you're able to find a list of products that are covered by these patents in some degree extent, and in some cases you'll find a good indicator there. But a lot of times what you'll find is you have to extract kind of keywords and technologies and aspects around the products themselves to help you understand what's within the patent portfolio as well. And I tend to not look as much as the specification here. I look more at the claims. So say if I find a noun pair or some key phrase around technology in a marketing brochure or a product technical description, or even a proceeding of a company member who talks about what the secret sauce is to making their product more special, I'll look for those same phrases in the claim language in the patent sense, so that to find those counts by themselves and maybe make a clustering around that product itself. For those who are not patent people purely, you can also do the same thing with trademarks and domains and other things as well, so you can see kind of what the whole IP cluster estate is around the product. Statistical extracts I talked about a bit earlier. This is simply using things like latent semantic indexes, word frequency, word rarity, things like that to help pull useful information out of the patent data from the free text or the claim language itself. Citation, let's talk a little bit about that, because citation, it is used as prior art. A prior citation used by examiners is something that you have shown or argued past at the patent office to get your item allowed. Forward citation is when you had your patent used as prior art in somebody's patent that has come after yours. The citation comes formally in two types. There's an examiner version and there's an IDS version. IDS is what the inventor submits, and examiner citation is what the examiner actually uses to cite towards or cite away from the inventions yourself. So, so citation requires a bit of tweaking to actually get meaningful data. Otherwise, you make an assumption because somebody flooded the office with a bunch of citations of their own that somehow a patent might be more valuable or more worth review because of that level of citation. There's many reasons to include lots of things in IDSs. Notwithstanding, especially if you have a patent family, you want to make sure that you aren't, quote unquote, hiding a reference in one patent application, keeping it from another one. Another way of budgets are, budgeting is one of the most telling arguments in putting budgets together. Is a lot of times as you say, well, my competitor is doing this many patents, so we should have at least money to do this many patents. A better way to think about that doing is segmenting. Our client wants to do this many patents here, and that would be if we can find 5 or 6 patents that matter in the competitor landscape. That would be to circumvent these particular things or these particular goals that we want to accomplish. Tom, I heard you speak there.
Yeah, along these lines, I really particularly like this type of analysis when we're talking about budgeting and pulling in business data like with relation to products, for example. So comparing patent counts as an indicator of spend, right, because they all cost something, against product revenue or R&D spend / budget. I guess there's kind of 2 ways to look at this. One is internally for determining appropriate patent spend within reason. If I've got a group of patents that are mapped to a particular product, the amount that I'm spending, that count that I have of those patents, comparing that to the revenue that's coming in from those products or the R&D budget surrounding those products can be, I guess, is if you compare it across various product groups, you might be able to find anomalies, things to look into that might be off. Similarly, if you're looking externally, looking for anomalies where you've got competitors, if you can get financial data, say it's a publicly traded company, for example, and you can compare patent filings versus revenue or spend in various areas. An example, high filings, low revenue area might indicate an investment for future growth, for example. Could mean mismanagement, but it could be an indicator like that.
Yeah, there is a fair amount of reticence to get rid of bad patents, and I've seen historically. But I think that helping your people make a better decision about what patents are meaningful, rather than just an overall top-line budget number for how many patents you're going to file, is helpful because I've seen companies keep they have threshold filing limits that they've set for good and sundry reasons, but a lot of times you find people struggling to come up with meaningful patents in that area, and what they come up with is something that could be described as incremental. But I mean, I think one of the things is consider for the finance people on the call, if you understand and like the ROIC calculation, there's a very similar way to calculate kind of coverage and ROIP, and so those who want to hear more on that, you can certainly contact me independently, and we can talk more about that. But there's a unique kind of conversation in budget and finance and fiscal responsibility between the IP filing budget as well as what you're going to accomplish with that budget as well. So this is we're way into hybridization as well in that respect. So those are the things that you're capable of doing with a patent count. So I say we're coming about 15 minutes left here. So I'll just kind of talk about where to mine for a bit. But then we'll save some time for questions here. So, I mean, there's a ton of places to mine outside the patent office itself. I mean, social media, as I mentioned before, is a great place. Anything marketing or web-based of a market competitor. Talking about citation, pricing. USPTO renewal data and USPTO pair are really good sources of finding interesting stuff that's indirectly patentable. I mentioned earlier, finding whether a patent in your portfolio has a strategic or a tactical effect. It has also a kind of a procedural effect in the patent office. It may be one of the favorite references that an examiner is using to block or slow down the competition's patents in that area. It may be a source of a one or two in many cases. Also worth taking a look there and using that matter strategically if you have family member possibilities on that to also make that available and enhance it in the direction as a continuation down the road of what might be strategic in blocking other matters in prosecution. So there's just everywhere you can go. I mean, everything is the extrinsic data is almost endless, and there are many ways to get to it and find better ways to get it taken in context so that your business person can make a great decision about further patenting. So let's just follow up with a few more examples. Talk about product analysis. Equivalent product analysis is a variant of product analysis where you are looking to enter a marketplace with your own product and you note that a competitor has certain patents around a product. This is the precursor to an FTO, which we'll cover at another aspect here. But the equivalent product analysis is generating a hypothetical product of your own and looking at what patents may or may not be impacted by your competitor getting into there. Claim similarity analysis is basically, it's a statistical tool of taking the claim language, throwing away the stop words, and finding what level of similarity naturally occurs, and then what level of dissimilarity or what vocabulary is missing from other people's patents that you may want to harvest and use for your own. Examiner citation, prosecution impact. That's when I talk about a matter being a blocking patent within the USPTO itself, or a favorite reference of the examiners. Our legal spend, I think we've covered that as well in different things here without
Mark,
yeah, go ahead.
As you go through those first bullet points, I think probably one of the big takeaways that comes to mind for me is that these hit on ways to gather the interesting and useful data sets to analyze, right? Yeah. Based on claim similarity, based on equivalent products, based on examiner citation. And I think reinforcing that so much of this patent count analysis is really keyed on the quality of the data set that you're working with from the beginning. Exactly. Because we know that counting patents from an analytical perspective, it's not the most complicated thing, right? You add up rows if it's in a table, for example. That's not tricky. The art lies in how to effectively gather those data sets to provide something that's going to have interesting business or legal intelligence once you do that counting afterwards.
Absolutely. Without a question, that's the one. There's the one thing I want people to take away from this analytics is spend the time trying what you want to count before you count it, because if you don't do that work ahead of time, you have those two basic pivots, class and ownership, which just don't give you a whole lot to work from. And so I think we talked a little more about legal spend, and another thing there is that we used to, when I was growing up as a patent attorney, way back in the dawn of time, we used to have a rule of thumb that for every $1 million of R&D spend you had, you should have at least one patent application come out of it. Now, I've looked at that statistic with some of the most creative and innovative companies out there, and that's been blown out of the water, is my view, because I think you really have to look at competitor legal spend in an entirely different way because what they spend versus what they buy, and it could be for every $250,000 of legal R&D spend they're filing a patent application. It really depends on what their intent is there. So there's no rule of thumb anymore in this area. It's something that really probably needs to be drawn out and teased out with simple analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I mean, if you have anything else to say on renewals and abandons, otherwise I'll close with company innovation here.
Yeah, sure. I'll just hit on that real quickly. Renewal counts versus abandon counts, in particular, as an analysis set, can be indicative of something. It's not always clear. Well, it depends on what they look like, right? So, in a particular field, if I take a look at what's renewed each year, if it's in countries that are renewed every year, or in the U.S. every 3.5, versus what's abandoned, I can essentially get a ratio, right, or a percentage. And I would expect, if I'm looking in a particular field, a baseline. So generally the abandoned to renewal for this particular field across multiple companies is around some percentage. And that's going to depend on the field and the companies. But then finding companies that show up below that percentage, so that have fewer abandonments, that might indicate that they're keeping most everything, so that they're really pushing in a particular space, or they highly value that space. On the other hand, it might also mean that they're not actively managing the portfolio from an abandonment perspective. So it could show that information at the starting point. The flip side of that is companies showing up above with a higher ratio than the baseline would indicate an active culling of the technology in that space. So a decrease in value for those companies within that space. So taking that renewal abandon ratio across multiple companies in a particular field, and it's important that you limit that field enough so that you get that specific data, and it can be useful from that perspective.
Thanks, Tom. So I just want to kind of close here with a little chat about innovation, because there are many statistical studies that talk about patenting and company-level innovation, as well as innovation has been a buzzword probably for the last decade. Every company wants to be seen as innovative. Every company wants to be known, and they generally have someone whose title is innovation officer or innovation this. I mean, I looked at LinkedIn before the phone call here, and there's some 2,900 people that call themselves chief innovation officers on LinkedIn. Just selecting a few of them there, it was shocking to find that there were, especially the ones that are sizable, how flat in the water that their level of innovation was, as I would see indicated by patent filing. So one of the things that I think is a really interesting question about innovation is that there's always the statement about patents squelching innovation, and the truly innovative companies out there, the ones that you have a product in your pocket from, or down on your on the shelf at home, and orders things from you when you talk to it. I mean, there's people that are truly are seen out there as innovative, especially in the consumer space, file a lot of patents. I mean, I find it a great one-to-one analysis, and they file much more prolifically than the rule of thumb that I quoted earlier. So I think one of the things that you can talk about in innovation is how well are you going to protect the innovation you're doing. You can be innovative as all heck if you can't protect it. It's like having a car without a road. So with that, I'd like to close and ask you, anybody who'd like to put questions in, please type them into the question side here. Otherwise, we will give you back the rest of your time, and I do appreciate your time and attention through the seminar here. And so we'll wait a couple minutes here for anybody to drop questions in our laps, and otherwise we'll close. It looks like everyone is relatively shy today here, so...
Here, Mark, I've got one.
Okay.
When you're pulling together these data sets, how do you like, when you're pulling together these data sets, where do you like to start? With a search tool?
I like to start with an interview of the people asking the questions first, because a lot of times people tell me what the patent portfolio is like of X. And so then I raise my hand, I go, so in what aspects do you care about? Do you care about how much they're spending, what areas of technology? I mean, I start just going down my list of direct counts. And often as not, the person that you're asking about the question had a specific question in mind and didn't quite have it phrased in a way to ask it. So I find that an interview gets me where I want to go first. Once I've got an interview, I'll start doing ranging searches on a number of tools, because each of the tools I use has a different outcome. And so what I start looking for is commonality in those things. And I might pick a seed patent that I find in there and get it back to the person asking the question. Say, is this what you're looking for? And if it's a yes, then I go whole hog in finding something that looks like that patent and the meets and bounds that we establish.
I like that, kind of like a seed.
Yeah, the seeding. I like patent seeds just because it helps me understand what the client is really looking for.
Sure.
We do have a question. What is the time limit to end patents? Patents, but unless you pay the maintenance fee. If you pay the maintenance fees, have a life of 20 years from the beginning of the filing date. There are some things there that go back into organizations, the various organizations treaties people belong to. So it's about 20 years as a rule of thumb, unless you don't pay the maintenance fees, and it expires or abandons. It expires because you haven't paid the maintenance fees. And Tom, is there a special word for that?
Yeah, various countries use different terms: withdrawn, lapsed, expired, abandoned, and that'll happen. That'll happen based on whatever type of annuity term that particular country has, plus their grace period. So in the U.S., if I decide to abandon a patent, it might be 4 years before it actually gets abandoned, 3.5 years plus a 6-month grace period. Canada, as another example, I'd pay my annuity fee yearly, but there's another 12-month grace period after that. So if I decide to abandon a Canadian patent, it might not show up as actually abandoned until 24 months after the renewal date.
Okay. Now another question. You have a service looking at claim similarity to improve applications. Can you describe that? Well, the claim similarity, whether we're improving an application or just looking at further applications similar, is simply an approach of finding word pairs that are meaningful to you, and also their synonyms, and then running statistical analysis to see which one of those show up in the claim. So there's a ton of different services out there that do that in a text analysis format. We brought a couple of those in-house here to tweak for our aspects. So I hope that's sufficient. If it didn't answer your question, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm one of the few Stignanis out there, so please reach out to me. Tom, you have the next question there?
Yeah, okay. So the next one is, which tools did you use to build the various graphics in this presentation? And Mark, I think you put some of these together, but I recognize several of them from the Patent Buddy /dashboard tool.
Yeah, I mean, the dashboard tool is probably and Excel are the gross ones used here for the most part. I mean, I have a very hard time explaining anything much beyond bar charts, so I tend to try to keep it as simple as possible. I think there's a bubble chart there that I pulled off another system, but it's basically predominantly this is just easy peasy statistical stuff that we can use Patent Buddy for.
And what is the best source for identifying renewals and abandons? Yeah, so It's going to be a lot of the search tools that you can use will include some of that kind of status. We use the Patent Buddy dashboard tool, which either you have that information as part of the pair file for the U.S. matter, or you get that on foreign matters as part of the INPADOC legal status data. But those are kind of going to be the keys. If you're looking at your own internal portfolio, then of course the most reliable data source is going to be the docketing system that you're using as well.
Any other questions here? Or otherwise, really, it's been an honor to speak with everybody. And again, if you didn't get a question answered to the full extent you want to, just reach out to us, and we'd be happy to take these questions offline with you. So with that,
yep, that'll conclude our this installment of our Analytics Excellence certification course. We look forward to everyone joining us again. The next session is on August 9th, and it'll be covering geographic coverage analysis. All right, thanks a lot, everybody, and thanks again, Mark.
All right, thanks you. Bye-bye.